Good morning, everyone. I want to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered here today on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. This is a good day for Innocence Canada and a great day for justice in Canada. I want to welcome here today, first of all, the Minister Virani, our Minister of Justice. It's really a privilege to have him here in the Innocence Canada offices. And of course, I want to welcome Susan Milgaard, David's sister, Joyce's daughter, after whom the legislation we're here to celebrate today is named. I also want to welcome the co-presidents of Innocence Canada, Jonathan Freeland and Ron Dalton. It's a particularly important day for Ron Dalton, one of Innocence Canada's co-presidents, because Ron spent 8 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, a murder he was wrongly convicted of in Newfoundland and Labrador many years ago, for which he was ultimately exonerated and has now come on to be a co-president of Innocence Canada. We have a good criminal justice system in Canada. That's always a good place to start. But having a good justice system doesn't mean it doesn't make mistakes, because our criminal justice system, like any justice system, is human, made up of humans, and it's fallible. And it's fallibility which makes this legislation that came into being just yesterday so important. The present system that we have in Canada, up until yesterday, for review of wrongful convictions was a ministerial process. And with no disrespect to Minister Virani, it was an unwieldy process, a slow process, and sometimes a politicized process. Not surprising, because it was a political member of government, ultimately, who had to make decisions on whether a person had been wrongly convicted or not. And ever since the inception of Innocence Canada, under its old name of the Association in Defence of the Wrongly Convicted in 1993, so 31 years ago, it has been one of our primary goals to convince government to enact the legislation that we now have, the Miscarriage of Justice Commission Act. We will now have, for the first time, a commission that will have as its sole task to investigate claims of wrongful conviction. It will have specialized commissioners, and by that I mean commissioners who have a specialty in understanding how wrongful convictions can come about, and will also want to provide remedies to those who have been wrongly convicted. It's a commission that will be entirely separate and independent of government. It must be a rare case that politicians give up power, but that's what's happened here. Minister Virani, you have given up a power. Maybe it's one you never wanted in the first place, but it's a power, and it's an important power that is now going to be with this new commission. And wonderfully, it's named after David and Joyce Milgaard. David Milgaard spent 23 years in prison for a crime that another man committed, a man who ultimately, 30 years too late, was convicted of the crime that David Milgaard had already spent 23 years in prison for. And his mother, for those of us who remember Joyce, and I'm sure we all do, his mother, of course, worked so tirelessly for her son while he spent those 23 years in prison. And as someone who's been practicing in one way or another in the field of criminal justice in Canada for 48 years now, there's something wonderful about having a criminal code where the back end of the justice system is governed by the David and Joyce Milgaard law. It's a constant reminder, and will be a constant reminder, to all actors in the justice system, from police forces to forensic experts, to Crown attorneys, to defense lawyers, and to judges, that you should better do your best to get it right, because if you don't, David and Joyce Milgaard's law is lurking, waiting to correct justice if you get it wrong in trying to administer it. There's something really wonderful about that David and Joyce's name will be there at the back end of the criminal justice system. So I'd like to introduce the minister. I think I think at Innocence Canada we have to acknowledge the remarkable work of both Minister Arif Virani, who I'm about to introduce, and his predecessor David Milgaard, who introduced this legislation in the first place. I think it can fairly be said that this legislation would be a wonderful legacy for both of them. And I think they probably view it that way as well. So, Minister Virani, thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here on such a really critically important day. James, thank you for your kind words. Susan, thank you for being with us today. And Innocence Canada, thank you for hosting us. In terms of being here at Innocence Canada, I was just reflecting on the first time I actually ever even heard the name James Lockyer. And James Lockyer's name was uttered to me when I was a law student in the mid-1990s at the Faculty of Law at the University of Toronto. And it was in the context of AIDWIC, as it was then known, and the predecessor, as he mentioned, to Innocence Canada. And I was immediately struck by this man's commitment to this cause, and also the significance and the weightiness of the work that is being done and continues to be done. But I'm also equally struck by the woman who is on my right, who bears the last name Milgaard. There would be no C40, no David and Joyce Milgaard's law without the family for whom this is named. And Susan and I shared a pretty important phone call just last week when we were on the precipice of where we are now, when we had the third reading vote in the Senate, which was a significant milestone. And on Tuesday, we had a royal assent that was achieved on this bill. And Susan is somebody who I would desperately love to get to know even more, because in my brief interactions with her, what I found in her is just the strength that I understand that it seems that all Milgaards possess. And it's a strength that comes in fighting for something you believe in and not giving up. And it's obviously heartwarming to think of the legacy that Joyce presented in terms of fighting for her son. I think most moms would fight for their sons no matter what, but it was really sort of a next level type of advocacy when we understand what Joyce Milgaard did, and also how David comported himself after being released. And I think that is a sign of the testament of the type of man he is. And when I was first learning about James, I was also first hearing about, songs that were written about David, including a very infamous Tragically Hip song. And that song is something that I think you listen to as a younger person, but when you really tease out the lyrics, you understand why it penetrated the Canadian psyche in the way that it did. And it is really, really gratifying to be here today, to be able to see to conclusion a piece of legislation that was really, the genesis of it starts with the advocacy of a mom for her son who wanted justice to be served. The people in this room, however, carry this work forward each and every day. And I'm quite humbled to see them. And I can see Mr. Dalton sort of nodding at me in the back here. The fact that we have amongst our midst not just David's sister, but also Mr. Dalton, Ron, who himself is an exoneree, is a testament to the work that is being done in Canada, but desperately needs to be done in Canada. And, James was noting that it's a rare occasion for politicians wanting to give up work. But I smiled at that. But I also think about this from the perspective of sort of what I've seen statistically. And I really want to emphasize this point for those of us that are gathered here today, because the statistics, from my perspective, are actually quite startling. And the statistics point to a situation where we know that the justice system is strong. I agree with James on that. But we know that the justice system makes mistakes. And in respect of those mistakes, what I would point you towards is some of what we've learned in other jurisdictions. And what I mean by that is that we looked closely with the help of people like Juanita Westmoreland-Traore and Harry Laforme, two former judges who helped us scope out what we would look at in terms of presenting this bill. But we looked at how it's done elsewhere. And obviously, most of you in this room will know that we have an Anglo-American system of law. We borrow a lot from the common law nexus that we share with Britain. And what never ceased to amaze me is when I looked at just the hard stats, that in about a 20-year span, we had about 200 applications, including 30 cases in which the matters were actually overturned. And among those 30 cases in a 20-year span, we had exactly 0 women, and we had exactly 7 racialized people. If you know anything about criminal justice in Canada, you should know that there is a severe overrepresentation of Indigenous and Black persons in our justice system. And when I heard those statistics, it was shocking. The comparative statistics in Britain in the similar time span are 854 cases submitted and 590 overturned, in roughly the same 20-year time window. You can conclude 2 things for those of you that apply the LSAT logic to this kind of stuff. The Brits are doing a woefully bad job at convicting people incorrectly, or the Brits are actually finding the cases. And I think what's really, really important is not just about sort of who's making the ultimate decision, but how do we find the cases? And what's really important in this legislation is that this legislation includes money, personnel, and tools, including things such as legal aid funding, the necessities of life funding, language translation, for finding those cases where they are in a language that people understand. So think about the Woodhouse case. We just heard from James when I was speaking to him about the lack of linguistic facility of people that were wrongfully imprisoned, including people that still to this day don't have the mastery of English. If we can approach people like that in the Indigenous language that they understand, what we will do is find the cases. And that's really, really critical. Because what I would say, and people ask me this all the time, well, how does this law work? Is this just a liberal initiative? I don't think it's a partisan initiative to want to ensure that people who are wrongfully convicted do not fester in our prison systems. That can never be a partisan initiative. Nobody, no matter how they vote, has a vested interest in people suffering in jail wrongly. If you want a first-hand account, ask Mr. Dalton in the back of this room. That's not partisan. But equally, what's not partisan is think about when a crime is committed, about the actual victim. And what they want is actual accountability. And when David Milgaard spends 23 years in jail for a crime he didn't commit, then one of the victims includes Gail, the nurse who was killed that day, and the fact that her actual perpetrator, the culprit, parades around free. That's not justice, and any politician of any political stripe should appreciate that. So that's what we're doing significantly with a bill such as this. And what's really, really critical is that it represents the incredible work that people have been working on. It's going to have an independent body that's going to review, investigate, and decide cases which should be returned to the justice system due to a potential miscarriage of justice. It's going to ensure that the experience of the Milgaard family is not repeated. That David Milgaard and people like him who are spending jail in time for crimes they didn't commit is not replicated. What I would say is that it's really important to the people in this room who are dedicating their lives right now to this work. People like Wynne, who I was just talking to. People like Mr. Dalton. People like Professor Freeman, who help run this organization. There are many, many, many others. And I would ask you to look around this room while you're here at some of the portraits that you see around you, because you'll see pictures of Guy Paul Moran. You'll see portraits and pictures of people like Stephen Truscott. Those portraits are a testament to the strength of those individuals, but also to the work of Innocence Canada. It's really, really important to ensure that we are addressing their needs and also restoring faith in the justice system. This is something I talk about all of the time. I talk about it with judges that I appoint every single day. I talk about it with the Chief Justice of Canada, about fundamentally what we're here to do, whether that's James and his advocacy, whether that's Innocence Canada, whether it's myself as minister, whether it's the Chief Justice of Canada. It's shoring up Canadians' confidence in the administration of justice. And I think with legislation like this, we can help to do exactement ça. Donc, je veux juste souligner que l'impact que ça va survenir en termes de l'impact pour tout le Canada est vraiment immense. C'est sûr que ça va augmenter au début le travail de la Commission, mais c'est une augmente qui est nécessaire. And what I would say to you is that it is really, really critical and became apparent to me about the need for reform in the justice system. And I want to spend a tiny bit of time on David Milgaard, because James and I share a very strong sense of pride and sense of respect for David Milgaard. And obviously when the transition happened, when I succeeded him in this role, we had some conversations and there were some tips, there was some guidance, but there was only one ask. And the ask was this bill. He said to me, please, 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 please do everything you can to help me keep our government's commitment that I made to David and Joyce Milgaard. And I said to him, I will do everything in my power to do exactly that. And James, what I can say to you is that it was a work. It was a labor of love, but it was also a collective work. There are 4 staffers of mine here right now. There are countless more back in Ottawa who work diligently to get this through the parliamentary process, get it through committee, get it off to the Senate, address concerns that were being raised, but always with pace and working with rapidity. And now the work is almost done. So yes, we're here to celebrate royal assent. But now the next step is for me and my team to get this commission up and running and get it up and running quickly. And that is what I commit to you, that we will do exactly that, because that will help fulfill the work that needs to be done to bring this full circle. But I'd also say to you, it's not going to be a passive body. What we're going to do is, in terms of filling out that commission, is we're going to ensure that we have commissioners that reflect the diversity of the country, who take into account the overrepresentation that I mentioned. That includes the overrepresentation of Indigenous and Black Canadians in our system, and that's critical for us to address. So we've got the law. What happens next? We work on getting that commission up and running, and that work begins in earnest. What does that mean? I'm not going to go into details of names, but know, James and the folks here at Innocence, people have already been contacting me in my office directly about their prospective interests in serving as a commissioner. Know that we're already thinking about the office of that commission. Know that we're thinking about the location of that office, how to staff that office. We already allocated dollars for this, which is very, very important. As early as the 2023 budget, we were thinking about how much money it would take to run this commission. So what I will do is I will work day and night, and I give you my absolute undertaking to make sure that this becomes a fully functional reality very, very soon, because that is what we need to see in this country, and that is what we need to see in terms of vindicating the work that you guys work so hard at doing. There are just a few other individuals I wanted to acknowledge as well. I mentioned them earlier, but Harry Laforme and Juanita Westmoreland Traore were the 2 judges who did extensive consultations on the potential structure and mandate of this commission. I mentioned to you David Milgaard and his intense commitment to this bill, and it is very satisfying to be able to keep that promise to him. I was actually with him, James. It was interesting. It was the night of the Christmas party in Ottawa, and David happened to be in Ottawa for said Christmas party, and when we got the news of royal assent, he was literally sitting right next to me. So sometimes you can't script this stuff. It was very, very appropriate. But David, as we know, made a commitment to the other David, to David Milgaard. And I'm proud to say that we've gotten to a place where we've fulfilled that commitment legislatively, and now we work on and actually completing the commission. And that to me is a testament to what the work that both your brother and your mother want us to complete. And I'm inspired by their legacy, and I will work day and night to fulfill that legacy. So on that note, I want to turn it over to Susan so that she can share a few words from a family perspective. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Well, these guys have pretty much wound it all up, but I can't thank them enough. My heart is really happy today, and I have messages for you from my mother and David. My mother would say, "It's terrific." David would say, "What are we doing now?" because he always wanted to do more and more and more, and he would continue to. You're answering that question because, and you've already told me you're going to be busy on it, so I know that they'll be watching you. So will I. And so will James. I can't speak enough to how much James Lockyer and Wynne and Ron and all of Innocence Canada have done for the wrongfully convicted over the years. But there's also all of the people out there from every walk of life that have supported all of us, from when David first got convicted to our case, or through Guy Paul Morin's case and everybody else's, and through all of the government. And every little bit of support that you granted and gave to us mattered. And this is what brought us here. It didn't take a village, it took a country to achieve what we have. And thank God for Canada, because we've done it. We changed a law. I mean, that's amazing. And think of all of those people that are still inside, that are wrongfully convicted, that are going to benefit because you took a moment to help and make a difference. It's been 55 years since this started in my life, and I'm still here, and I'm not going away, and neither are these beautiful people that are helping to do this justice. I stood outside this morning watching the flag of Canada wave, and I'll tell you without a word of a lie, for the first time in my heart, I felt proud to be standing here knowing what a wonderful country this is because of you and everything that you've done. So hear me now. You made a difference. And I thank you from my heart and my mom's and David's. Thank you.
If I could just add one little anecdote about David and Joyce. I remember when I received the DNA results. It was July 17th of 1997, and I received them on a payphone in the Holiday Inn that used to be on Chestnut Street in Toronto at about 8 in the morning. I called into the lab in Yorkshire in England where the work was being done. I knew I was going to get an answer, and I got an answer from Ed Blake, who was a man, a scientist who did a lot of post-conviction DNA work and a lot of exonerations, particularly in the US. And Dr. Blake told me that it wasn't David. He was the one person in the world that we knew had not killed Gail Miller, and not only that, that they were able to identify who the real killer was. And Joyce knew that we were going to find out that morning the results, and she was in the air at the time. She was flying in from Winnipeg. So I went up to the airport to meet her with Guy Paul Morin. And Guy Paul is the one who told your mum that the results had come in and David had been exonerated. It was a wonderful moment up at Pearson Airport that morning, something I'll never forget. So we're open to questions, all of us.
Daniel Dove, Global News for the Minister, hoping you can answer in both English and French. Minister, are we okay? Okay, yeah. Minister, your colleague, caucus colleague Wayne Long said that the Prime Minister is, quote, delusional if he believes he can stay on as party leader. Is Mr. Long correct or incorrect with that, and why?
So what I'll say in respect of sort of what's been transpiring over the last few days in Ottawa is that it's ultimately decisions will be taken by the parties that are involved, but I'll also just reflect on sort of my personal interactions with the Prime Minister. When the Prime Minister appointed me into this role, he asked me to serve as Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. he asked me to continue with the mandate letter he had given to my predecessor. That mandate letter included changing the way we handle wrongful convictions in Canada. This is a culmination of and a fulfillment of that ask he made of me, and this is a commitment to the work we're trying to do as Liberals. And what I'm focused on in this moment is this announcement and a very significant step in concluding that work. And I think that's the most important thing that I'm thinking about today. Donc, ce que je peux répondre en français, c'est effectivement que il y a beaucoup de questions qui soulèvent au niveau parlementaire à Ottawa. Je comprends toutes les questions. Mais je fais les réflexions en ce moment que lorsque le Premier ministre m'a demandé d'agir comme ministre de la Justice et procureur général du Canada, il m'a aussi demandé de compléter le travail qui était dédié à ma prédécesseur dans la lettre de mandat, de créer un nouvel système pour traiter les personnes condamnées à tort. Ça fait partie de mon lettre de mandat et aujourd'hui, on célèbre un aspect où on a complété une de ces tâches extrêmement importantes. C'est ça que je vois comme les tâches prioritaires pour moi pour le moment et je vais concentrer sur les tâches devant moi. Merci.
So follow up on that. I appreciate your comments today on this, but this is a tumultuous time facing the country, potentially 25% tariffs. Premier Doug Ford called what's happening in Ottawa recently chaos. I'm wondering can you tell us about what advice, what conversations you're having with the Prime Minister right now?
Well, I can, without breaching cabinet confidence, what I can say to you is that, like any government, we are seized with the issue of addressing what is happening on our border. I hope that this week people followed, including the press corps, aspects of the fall economic statement that address border security. There is an over $1 billion package that is presented as part of the fall economic statement that addresses border security. That is very, very important because we've heard loudly and clearly from our American counterparts about the need to address things at the border, and this predates the advent of the most recent presidential election. Those are conversations I was having with my Attorney General counterpart, Merrick Garland. Those were conversations that Dominic LeBlanc was having with his counterpart, Secretary Mayorkas. That's very, very important, but I also think it's very, very important for Canadians to reflect on the fact that in the current government, you have a government that has experience both on a bilateral basis but also internationally in dealing with a Trump administration between 2017 and 2021, and we acquitted ourselves extremely well, including with the NAFTA renegotiations, and that's important in terms of bringing that knowledge base and experience to the challenges that are facing Canada going forward, and we're going to bring that experience and that acumen to bear in terms of what transpires with the new American administration. Voulez-vous la même chose en français? Que je vais essayer. Donc, ce que je veux souligner, c'est que je ne veux pas briser la confidentialité parmi le Conseil des ministres, mais ce que je peux souligner, c'est que avec n'importe quel ministre, on pense toujours de notre relation bilatérale avec les États-Unis. C'est extrêmement important pour l'économie et la politique canadienne, c'est sûr. Et j'espère que parmi tous les journalistes de Galerie de Presse, vous avez noté et constaté que dans le Fall Economic Statement, l'adresse de l'automne économique pour le Canada, ça touche plusieurs aspects, mais aussi ça touche effectivement ce qu'on visionne en termes des investissements pour sauvegarder et augmenter la sécurité vis-à-vis de la frontière canadienne. Parce que c'était une requête d'administration qui va arriver de Trump, mais aussi c'était soulevé à plusieurs reprises avec moi par le procureur général Garland, mon homologue américain, mais aussi par le secrétaire Mayorkas, qui est l'homologue de Dominic LeBlanc, qui est notre ministre de la Sécurité publique. Donc ça touche un enjeu qui est extrêmement important pour tous les deux pays et on va l'adresser avec les investissements qui sont importants. Et je voulais juste souligner que pour tous les Canadiens qui nous regardent en ce moment-là, qu'avec notre gouvernement, sous le leadership de Justin Trudeau, on a un gouvernement qui a une expérience avec M. Trump lorsqu'il était le président la première fois, disant qu'entre 2017 et 2021, on était là pour défendre le Canada, pour négocier avec l'administration Trump. Et on a complété la tâche d'une façon on a réussi avec nos efforts. Disons qu'on a réglé la situation avec NAFTA et plusieurs autres défis devant lesquels nous avons fait face. Donc ça peut donner, ça doit donner un peu de confiance pour les Canadiens qu'on est prêt pour la tâche et pour l'adresser de nouvelle fois. Merci.
Bonjour, Jérémy Bergeron de Radio-Canada. Ma question, elle est assez simple et difficile à mentir, là. Essentiellement, est-ce que Justin Trudeau peut rester en poste, oui ou non?
Donc, comme je viens de mentionner, aujourd'hui, il y a sûr qu'il y a des décisions qui seront prendre par rapport des acteurs à Ottawa. Ce que je peux souligner, c'est que mes réflexions aujourd'hui, spécialement ici aujourd'hui, c'est sur effectivement ce que ça concerne les conversations que j'ai eues avec le Premier ministre. Et lorsque le Premier ministre m'a nommé dans ce poste, il m'a demandé de faire des tâches pour protéger les Canadiennes, pour sauvegarder leur sécurité, mais aussi d'adresser leurs droits, de sauvegarder leurs droits fondamentaux. Mais aussi, il m'a dit que la lettre mandat qui est attachée à ma prédécesseur continue toujours et ça inclut le fait qu'il faut régler et changer le système où on traite les condamnations à tort. C'est ça qu'on célèbre aujourd'hui et c'est ça que je vais concentrer sur parce que c'est important pour moi de m'occuper avec mes propres tâches comme ministre et comme procureur général du Canada.
Oui ou non, Justin Trudeau peut-il rester en poste?
And what I was just saying in English is that I think it's really important that decisions will be made in Ottawa by the actors that are involved. And what I am reflecting on at this point in time is exactly what the Prime Minister and I talked about when he first named me into this post in July of 2023. We talked about me serving as Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. We talked about addressing community safety. We talked about ensuring Canadians' rights are protected. And we talked about my mandate letter. And my mandate letter includes things that were in the mandate letter of my predecessor, which includes addressing wrongful convictions in Canada and how we address them, how we find those cases, and how we work to ensure that they are overturned. And that is what we are celebrating today, and those are the types of things I will concentrate on.
Ma question de suivi, oui ou non, Justin Trudeau peut-il rester en poste?
Comme je viens de mentionner, c'est une décision qui, avec les personnes à Ottawa, ils vont décider eux-mêmes de ces types de questions. Pour moi, ce que je fais, c'est mon travail comme ministre, comme membre du Conseil des ministres. Et mon travail, c'est d'adresser la sécurité publique, c'est d'adresser les droits fondamentaux qu'il faut protéger. C'est d'adresser effectivement l'injustice avec les personnes qui sont condamnées à tort. Et c'est ça qu'on célèbre aujourd'hui avec un changement immense, un changement fondamental de notre système ici au Canada. Would you like that answer in English as well? OK, parfait, merci.
A question for Mr. Lockyer.
Yes.
Good morning, sir. For those that
Good. I thought we were in question period for a while in the House of Commons.
for those who
Let's
are,
all remember why we're here today. We're here to celebrate this new legislation for the wrongly convicted. Please go ahead.
I'll ask you a very simple question. With the evolution and advancements in DNA evidence, do you foresee a reduction in those claiming to be wrongfully convicted? What are your thoughts on that?
As forensic sciences advance and as human knowledge advances, you certainly hope, and I hope, that wrongful convictions will be less frequent. But there's a bit of a reality about DNA. It's not necessarily the golden touch. It probably plays a role in maybe 20% of criminal cases. Let's remember that this commission is going to review both the most serious and less serious cases. It's going to review homicide convictions all the way down to, if you look at the English experience, all the way down to robbery convictions, assault convictions, and the like. And certainly, I think advances in forensic science, DNA being an obvious one, will reduce the likelihood of future convictions. It certainly won't eliminate them. And of course, it also plays a very important role in exposing wrongful convictions. It has that dual role of both being a way of capturing or recognizing the right person who actually committed a crime, and also exposing that the wrong person has been convicted of the crime. So the more advances we have in science and the more advances we have in human knowledge generally is always going to be good.
Thank you for that. And my follow-up, can you briefly describe your thought process for those that aren't familiar with your work? Do you take on all cases, or do you separate those where you believe there is a wrongful conviction? Or do you look at cases and decide evidence was admitted admissibly and you take a case on for that reason alone? How do you go through your process?
Okay, Innocence Canada, you're talking about Innocence Canada. In Innocence Canada's process is we start from, we first of all start from a belief that the person we're trying to help is innocent. At the same time, we acknowledge that you can't always prove innocence, that in some cases that's going to be elusive, especially decades later. So in a homicide case, you won't necessarily be able to identify the real perpetrator all these years later. Sometimes you will. In David Milgaard's case, we were. Guy Paul Moran's case, we eventually were. And others, that's happened as well. But you can't always do that. So in some cases where we believe the people are innocent, we acknowledge we may not be able to prove it, but if we can prove that they are victims of a miscarriage of justice, we will take on that case. But we would not take on a case simply because a person may have been the victim of a failure of process. Unless we believe they're innocent, we will not take on their case. That doesn't mean that someone who's been the victim of a failure of process won't be able to go to a lawyer of their own and try and get a remedy accordingly. But at Innocence Canada, we would not be prepared to help them.
Thank you. Just a question at the front. Reminder, one question, one follow-up.
Yeah, no problem. For the minister, you talked about the importance of continuing this work. You and many of your colleagues stand to lose your seats if the polls continue under Justin Trudeau's leadership. How do you feel that it is important to continue to support him, or will you continue to support him?
So I didn't know we were going to get into aspects of local politics in Parkdale High Park, but what I would say to you is that a couple of things is that I have absolute confidence in the Prime Minister in terms of what he has asked me to do, and that is serve as a Minister of Justice who defends people's rights, defends the Constitution, doesn't throw around willy-nilly ideas about invoking the notwithstanding clause, for example. I have absolute confidence in his idea of targeting people that are vulnerable, in his ideas of addressing systemic overrepresentation, such as we see with Indigenous and Black people in this country, to excess. The statistics are startling, ranging between 3 times overrepresentation to 8 times if you're a youth person in this country. I have absolute confidence in those tasks. And what I would say to you is that there's a lot of discussions about what is going to transpire or not. I cannot provide you clarity and answers about people's futures. I can speak for myself and the work that I've been asked to do, and I am very pleased and very honored to have this role, and I'm going to execute the work that the Prime Minister asked me to execute on, and that work conforms with the reason why I originally ran for office, which is to promote equality, combat discrimination, and defend people's rights, and that's what I will continue to do.
Understood. As a follow-up, what statements from Freeland's resignation letter do you agree with?
So what I'd say to you with respect to Chrystia is that I have known her for a long, long time. And I know her to be an incredible colleague, an incredible parliamentarian, and I would count her as a friend. And I want to just take this opportunity just to salute her distinguished record of serving in so many portfolios in this country, and saluting her contributions to Canada. And I'm very encouraged that she continues to run and will continue to run in the forthcoming election. And I respect Chrystia a great deal.
Hi there, it's Chris Glover with CBC. I just kind of want to follow up on something that you said earlier. Decisions will be taken by the actors involved. Do you not see yourself as a Liberal member, as an actor involved in this conversation about whether or not Justin Trudeau should stay on as leader?
I see myself as a member of Parliament for Parkdale High Park. I see myself as the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. Do I participate in conversations around the cabinet table? Absolutely. Am I going to divulge those conversations with you? No, because that would breach the oath that I took when I was sworn in. What I would say to you is that I, like other Liberal members of caucus, and I, like any other parliamentarian, participate in conversations that are germane to my duties, and I will continue to do so. But what I would say to you is that, equally as what I just said to your colleague, is that I focus on the work that is before me, and I focus on who has asked me to complete that work. That is the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. I have absolute confidence in his orientation towards the work that he has given me to do, which includes addressing inequities, it includes addressing inequality, it includes combating discrimination, it includes addressing overrepresentation. You know, a person that we've been talking a great deal about the Milgaard family and their legacy. Ultimately, the Milgaard family's legacy resonates with something that is in the same charter that the Prime Minister's father helped bring to this country, and that's about the presumption of innocence, and always ensuring that the presumption of innocence is maintained. That's about fulfilling the Milgaard legacy, and also the legacy of the Trudeau family in terms of what they've provided to this country. I have confidence in the work and delivering on that work, and I will continue to deliver on that work while I'm in this role.
Can I just interrupt for a moment, Mr. Minister? I'd like you to know that we have, I see online with us is Maria Shepherd. She's another one of our wrongly convicted, and in fact now we can see her. And I thought we should just recognize her as being a part of this press conference, given why we're here.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Maria, for joining us. It's really tremendous to have you here and to have Mr. Dalton here. Donc, effectivement, ce que je veux répéter, c'est que mes tâches sont effectivement comme un député de Park de Park, mais aussi comme une ministre. Je participe dans mes fonctions comme il faut, et comme je vais toujours le faire. Et ce que je peux souligner, c'est que effectivement, ce qu'on célèbre aujourd'hui, c'est le changement fondamental de notre système pour traiter les condamnations à tort, et avec un changement si significatif qui relève au David et Joyce Milgaard's Law et le projet de loi C40, ça me donne une habilité de réfléchir et de prendre un moment de penser de quel type de tâches et priorités étaient me données par le Premier ministre Justin Trudeau. Et lorsqu'on parle de David Milgaard, ça soulève d'une question assez fondamentale de notre Constitution. La Constitution qui était présentée au Canada et livrée au Canada par le père Trudeau, Pierre Trudeau, qui touche le fait qu'on est présumé d'être innocent ici au Canada. Il s'agit de l'article 11 de la Charte canadienne. Et lorsqu'on peut livrer un projet de loi comme celle qu'on célèbre aujourd'hui, lorsqu'on peut changer le système où on traite les condamnations à tort, c'est un aspect où on peut fulfill, je cherche le mot en français, je m'excuse, mais on peut compléter ou fulfill la grande promesse de notre Constitution. Et c'est ça les priorités pour moi et les priorités qui étaient conférées à moi par le Premier ministre Trudeau. Et j'ai confiance dans lui en termes de ces types de priorités qu'il m'a donné. Merci.
Okay, I think that concludes our question. Oh, you have another question?
Hi, Katie Newman, CBC News. Thank you all for being here and congratulations on the bill. I'm just wondering, Mr. Virani, what do you think the Prime Minister should be considering right now?
What I would reflect on is simply the fact that we have always worked on as a government, and I think any government should focus on Canadians, and that's what we're doing day in and day out, and that is something that I've always found remarkable in the Prime Minister, is his ability to concentrate on Canadians. And it's very important for me to be back in Toronto, to be back in Parkdale High Park, etc., in my riding, etc., because it allows you to reconnect with Canadians. And I think focusing on Canadians is what we're talking about today, right? Because when we talk about Canadians, sometimes we need to talk about Canadians that unfortunately do not get as much attention as they need to. And that includes Canadians that are wrongfully imprisoned, that are in our prison system right around the country, from coast to coast to coast, who don't deserve to be there, don't merit being there, and are wrongfully there. That's what I'm doing today by focusing on Canadians and a core of Canadians that unfortunately have not been addressed sufficiently, absent the incredible work here at Innocence Canada and the dedicated work of people like James Lockyer and everyone that works with him. So that remains the focus on this day with respect to that core, but it remains my focus day in and day out in terms of my work as Justice Minister. And I'm sure the Prime Minister is doing exactly that, as he always encourages every member of Cabinet to focus on Canadians and their needs.
And is there anything that the party could do to overcome the events that transpired in the past week?
I think the response is going to be very, very similar, and I think what the party needs to do is understand. And I speak to you as a proud Liberal, as a person who has always found myself inclined to the Liberal vision of promoting success in this country, providing people with economic opportunity, but always addressing inequalities and ensuring that there is a strong social safety net. That's what orients me as a Liberal. That's what oriented me in my decision to run. And I think people across the country should reflect on why they are Liberals, what kind of vision they have for this country, but also reflect, frankly, on whom would purport to replace us as government. And what motivates me, and motivates every single Liberal, no matter whom you're talking to right now, is that we're all unified behind the idea that a change of government with that individual named Polyev proposing to replace us would not benefit my riding, would not benefit this city, would not benefit this country. I would just take this opportunity to encourage you to reflect on how this law transpired in terms of its development in the parliamentary process. At one point, this was being reported back by the Justice Committee with Conservative proposals to gut the entire bill. That's apparently the reflection on prioritizing wrongfully convicted people in this country. That, to me, is morally bankrupt. That's not the kind of government I want to see. That's not the kind of treatment I want to see for the wrongfully convicted. That's what motivates me to continue to do this work and continue to do more work to address inequalities, combat discrimination, and fight for the wrongfully convicted, which is part of what makes me a Liberal.
Okay, we have a few more minutes to answer questions on today's topics if anyone else has any questions. Yep. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Oh, yeah, I knew that was
Thank you, James.
Good work.
Do you want to?